Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is dedicated for the speedy and complete refuah shlema for Rabbi Eli Abadi Eliyahu Shimon ben Mazal Fortuna. Please make brachot for his refuah. Also dedicated for a speedy and complete refuah shlema for Rabbi Shlomo Farhi, Chana Batzima Fega. Please make brachot for her refuah. Also in loving memory of Victor Azrak, Lili Nishmat Yeshua ben Reina, sponsored by his son Marvin Azrak. Loving memory Lili Nishmat Avraham ben Yecheskel and Zolecha, sponsored by his son Maurice Chosh. And sponsored by Pauline and Soli Asa, dedicated loving memory of their grandfather, Lili Nishmat Yosef ben Sarah. Loving memory of Ms. Lily Safra, Lili Nishmat Leah Bat Chana, our philanthropy reached so many throughout the entire world. Sponsored by Edward Sofer, dedicated loving memory of his parents, Ray and David Sofer, Lili Nishmatem, David ben Moshe ben Aima, and Simcha Bat Chana, Alem Shalom. In loving memory of Mo Mala, Lili Nishmat Moshe ben Jamil for his Askara by Jack and Michelle Mala. And finally, sponsored by Edward Sofer, dedicated for the complete refuah shlema for Eliyahu Shimon ben Mazal Fortuna and Chana Batzima Fega. Hazaku Baruch to each and every one of those dedications, and sponsored by David Yash in honor of you and your substantial capacity to do good today and every day. My friends, there's an interesting commentary that expresses something very beautiful about this pasuk. Ve'ele Mishpatim. We start with the Jewish people. They're living in the desert, okay? They're receiving their bread from the heavens. Their water doesn't come from the water company. It's not Fiji water. The water comes from a traveling be'er. It's moving with them. Their home, their real estate, right? Where is it? It's the Alanei HaKavod, the tents that they're traveling with. So they don't have any problems with food or with water, with air conditioning, with travel. Their clothing, it says, would grow with them. It would not grow old. Simlatecha lo baltame alecha. Their clothing wouldn't grow old. All of their needs were taken care of. And in that idyllic state, the Torah chooses to teach us the laws of Eved Ivri. Now, what makes a person enter into this deal that he becomes a Jewish servant, a slave, Eved Ivri? There are two ways a person could become Eved Ivri. One way is that the person has no money. They need to survive. If you're eating, if you work for somebody, then they provide you with your food, with your shelter, with the things that you need. So one way is someone who doesn't have anything. So he chooses to put himself in to this thing called Eved Ivri, this bondsman relationship. The second way, the Chachamim tell us, is if a person steals, they don't have money to pay back, so it's the long-term version of, a person who goes to the restaurant, eats, and then doesn't pay. They used to make him go in the back and wash the dishes. Okay? So this idea that you're going to wash the dishes, you steal a meal, you wash the dishes, you steal, a TV, maybe, it costs a lot of money. You have to pay more. So there might be something guy stole, could be a lot of money that he needs to become an Eved Ivri. Now the commentators ask, so interesting. This is the first mitzvah, effectively, that the Jewish people are getting after Aseret HaDibrot. Why, of all mitzvot, would you give me this one now? No one needed to steal anything. There's no point. And the other reason that makes you a servant, when your needs are not met, no one had needs that weren't being met. So why would the Torah communicate this law at this stage? It wasn't relevant. And the answer that I saw to this was magnificent. The answer is, it's true that the reason for the mitzvah was not relevant. But the emotion, the sensitivity, the empathy, the sympathy that a person needs to have when that situation would arise was something that was only available in such large supply at that moment in history. You tell a person who's never in his life known what it feels like to go hungry. We live in a crazy generation. In our generation, you have so many people, myself included, that we do, intermittent fasting. So you're choosing to be hungry, right? So, but again, for most of human history, that's not been the case. If you were hungry, it was because you didn't have enough money to put food in your belly, right? If you had money, you weren't hungry. This concept is so powerful. The Jewish people, they weren't hungry. They weren't lacking anything. So what would possibly motivate them to get to this place? My friends, listen to this. If you don't know hunger, you don't know what it feels like for someone else to be hungry. Guy comes to you and he tells you, I don't have any ekel, I don't have any food. There's a beautiful Gemara. The Gemara tells us that if a person comes to tell you that he wants to raise tzedakah from you, right, the person needs to corroborate their story. I think today we have this idea that a guy comes to collect tzedakah, he's got this piece of paper that says, somebody checked me out, this and this day, they know. The guy's telling you that his kid is sick. The guy's telling you he runs a yeshiva. How do you know he's not a sketch? What proof do you have? So they have organizations that what they do is check these people out. Like you have a hashgacha on food, you have a hashgacha on a person collecting tzedakah. So they have these letters from a beit din, from a certain place that says that this guy is who he says he is. Now, someone comes and they say, I don't have food to eat. What does the Gemara say? A person like that, you don't ask them any questions. You don't ask them for a piece of paper. You don't ask them anything. Why? Because who would humiliate themselves to come to you to ask you for the most basic needs that a human being could have? If a person asks you for money for food, or if he asks you for money for clothing, says the halakha, you don't ask them questions and check on him. Only problem is, people now read this Gemara. What do they tell you? And it's a problem, by the way. The Gemara says, when we taught the law of migu, you guys know what the law of migu is? What's the law of migu? Migu is a law, it's called koach hata'ana. What does that mean? Let's say I tell you in court, I tell you, believe me that I'm telling you that this money is mine, because if I wanted, I could have said that there is no money at all. That's called a migu lahadam. Migu lo hayu devarim me'olam. So if I'm telling you this, trust me that I'm telling you the truth, because if I told you that, which I could also say, the court would accept my line. So therefore, that's called koach hatana, the strength of a claim. Believe me on claim A, because if I wanted to lie, I could have said claim B, and then the court would have accepted it. So therefore, I must be telling the truth when I say claim number A. The Gemara says that when we taught the laws of migu, what did we do? We made ganavim. We made gazlanim. Because now you taught the sketch, the husho, the liar, you taught him what to say. If he would have just said this, he would have lost the court case. Now you told him, listen, plead the fifth. They have to listen to you. So we taught people how to be ganavim. The Gemara said, what are we going to do? You have to learn the halakha. But once the person knows the halakha, the guy could lie.
It's like the shoplifter in Dwayne Reed. He knows there's no consequence.
Exactly. Once the newspapers publish that in Dwayne Reed, that they're not going to stop you if you go and take anything, and that if a guy tries to stop you, he's going to lose his job. They'll fire him if he tries to stop you. Do you know that? I hope we're not making more people steal from Dwayne Reed. It's Genevat Israel even, okay? Now, my friends, if a person says, I have no food, I have no clothing, halakha is you don't ask him. You give him. He says that you give them money. Why? Because no one, it's so humiliating to say, I don't know if a guy wouldn't lie like that. And I think also there's a little bit of amigo in there. Right? The guy, if it comes to, raising money, he could ask for something that's much more self-respectable if he's lying. Something that's not his fault. Right? That he doesn't need to look like a person that can't get his life together. My friends, you have a person that's asking for, they have so little ekel, there's so little, it's hard for me and for you to be able to relate to that person. You know why? When was the last time you were outside in the freezing cold, not for 3 minutes while you were running to your Uber, not for 10 minutes when you forgot to bring a coat and you walked to shul and you ran home and you did this for 10 minutes, not like that. When you didn't have a place to go and you sat out for hours. I see, sometimes you see in the city, homeless people, not all of them are normal, unfortunately. Some of them are mentally ill. But when you walk over the grate from the subway and you get the air, and you can't breathe from the air because it stinks, it smells, it chokes you. But you see people sleeping on the grate. Why? Because they have to choose between not breathing and freezing to death at night. Imagine the choices that people have to make. You and I, thank God, we can't relate to such choices. Says the Torah, I'm going to teach you a halakha. The halakha part of it is not going to be relevant right now. No one needs to steal. No one's going to steal. No one doesn't have food. No one doesn't have shelter. You have the ananei kavod. You have the man. The halakha part is not relevant. But I'm going to teach you as a master. Remember what it feels like to be an Eved. And there was a limited time offer on how long the Jews could be reminded. Remember what it feels like to be a slave. Because you know what happens very quickly when you rise from being a slave to being a free man, from being a free man to being a rich man. You forget very quickly. The people who once upon a time needed other people to help them start their business, now when people come to them and ask them for that same starting loan that they had to ask someone else for a short amount of time, the guy says, yeah, of course, I myself needed. After a short while, what do they start saying? I had to do this by myself. I had to make my way in the world. You'll figure it out. You figure it out yourself too. They forgot that they didn't figure it out themselves. They also needed that help. So there's a limited time offer. How long you can feel the empathy of an experience that you remember and you haven't retranslated in your own brain. So God says, before we move on from this, I just want you to remember, guys, lock this feeling in so that forevermore, in a scenario with an Eved Ivri, you'll know how to treat him. You'll know to give him the pillow. You'll know not to treat him or demean him and make him feel like a second-class human being just because he has a second-class life situation. My friends, this idea taught me a great line, a great concept with regards to the raising of children, to the raising of people. It's a famous line that goes, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And that line is a tremendous, I think it was Winston Churchill that used to say it. But this idea that he communicated, and he was a wartime president, a wartime prime minister, he used, so to speak, this crisis to be able to step in to become something that they needed him to become. You know, after those years where there was no longer an emergency, he maybe wasn't as well suited as the leader of the people at that time. But for when they needed someone like him, there was no one like him. My friends, listen to this carefully. I want to suggest another idea of a crisis being a terrible thing to waste. Your child comes home from school. They're crying about the fact that somebody made fun of them. Your natural instinct is to do what? To comfort your child, to tell the kid he doesn't know what he's talking about. This child is just being mean. Maybe they're being jealous. Maybe this, maybe that. That's our natural instinct. We want to protect our kids. But my friends, our job in life is not only to bubble wrap our children and to protect them. Our job is also to raise them, to make them men and women that are going to be able to be good, upstanding citizens, the fathers, mothers, friends, brothers, sisters of the future. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. You know how you're feeling now? It really doesn't feel good when someone makes fun of you, does it? Don't waste the chance to tell your child. Make sure that you're never the bully in the story. You feel how it feels, right? Make sure that you don't do this to anybody else. Because the way you're feeling now, some other kid is going to feel if you say something to them in the wrong way. A person has lost all of the money that they have in this world. Of course, the first thing we want to do, help rehabilitate him, get him a job, get him standing back on his feet. But also remind him when he's getting this help, you know something? It's so important to remember how you're doing this now so that in the future you could be there for someone else who's going through the same thing. My friends, it's not only that sensitizes them in the future, it also in some ways makes the person feel that there's some value and point in what they're going through, so that they could become something that other people could lean on in their time of need. This concept that we're learning over here, it's not an important message for now. The halakha is not nogea, it's not relevant. But the sympathy, the empathy, if I don't tell it to you now, if I don't point it out to you now, you won't get it. Sometimes as a rabbi, you have to say something to somebody that doesn't feel so nice. Because the person is right now going through something, and at the time it feels like the only thing they need is to be encouraged. But if you miss that window to tell the person, look, I know it's tough, we'll be there for you, though I just want to point out that what you're going through is actually something that you're currently doing to somebody else. How sad is it when someone comes to you complaining about the fact that someone, how can a person do this? They're ripping me off in the business. When you know that this is something that they actually either did or are doing to someone else. If you miss the chance to make the person realize in that moment that the way he feels is the way the other guy feels, and if he would do anything to have this stop for him right now, he should maybe also do anything to stop himself from being the bully that he so despises in this story. My friends, the Zohar tells us something unbelievable. The Zohar says that this idea, the concept of theft, is something that's incredibly important. I think that you and I like to think of ourselves as being upstanding people. If someone were to call you a thief, what would you say? True or not true? Not true. Not true? Yeah?
What did I steal?
Someone calls you a thief. What would you say? Not true. Me? Not true. Chachamim tell us though, however, that actually more of us are thieves than we care to admit. Why? Because in our minds, we've defined the concept of theft as something, perhaps at its lowest common denominator. Taking out a gun, holding up an old lady at the traffic light, and stealing her purse. I never did that. But stealing has so many different forms. Stealing, as an example, is a person who's doing something dishonest, trying to just get away with it. You're massaging the truth in a deal. You're presenting a deal in a way where the person doesn't focus on, doesn't realize that what you're selling him is not what you're telling him you're selling him. That's stealing. A person uses, I wanted to share with you, I had a non-Jewish cleaning lady in London. Her name was Mary. I want to give her the credit. She's not Jewish. She wore a big fat cross around the neck. She was religious. My wife came to pay her at the end of the week, and she said it's too much. My wife said, why? This is every week. She said, it's true, but yesterday I had to take a phone call. I had an emergency phone call from my husband in Romania, and I was on the phone for 20 minutes or 15 minutes. She works with us all day. She's there from the morning until the night. She comes early, leaves late. For 15 minutes, she had an emergency. If she would have asked me or my wife, can I take this call? It's my husband calling from Romania. It's an emergency. What would I have said? Of course. She's telling my wife to take money off because she spent 15 minutes on the phone for an emergency with her husband. In a scenario where if she would have asked, we would have said yes. But you know what? She didn't ask because it was an emergency. And if we didn't say yes, even if I'm sure it's fine. I'll give you an example. You work for someone in an office. You invite your friend up to the office because you want to schmooze. First of all, is the time, are you punching that time on someone else's clock? Number two, you invited them to the office. You're having the coffee, the cake of the office. Does the office allow you permission to do that? See, we don't think of that as stealing. You don't got to walk in and hustle something from Dwayne Reed in order to be a ganav. In fact, the Talmud tells us that there's an idea called stealing sleep. Gezel shena. Someone's sleeping, you wake them up because you're being insensitive, stole their sleep. That's gezel. You could steal someone's sleep. You could steal someone's credit. What if someone says that I got a phone call once from someone. He says, Rabbi, can I ask permission? I said, permission for what? I listen to your Divrei Torah, fantastic, Rabbi, I listen all the time. I'm asking permission to say over your Divrei Torah. I said, of course. He goes, is it okay if I don't say it in your name? He's a rabbi, he doesn't have goods. So now he listens every day to class, comes to the shul, he gives what I'm teaching. And I said to him, you know what, Rohi, as far as I'm concerned, no problem. But I'm not the one you have to ask. Because the Gemara says, Omer davar b'shem omro, person says something in the name of the person who said it, mevi geula la'olam, it brings Mashiach to the world. Go ask all the Jews if they don't mind that Mashiach should not come quicker. If you don't say my name, Fadal, no problem. Yeah, but I don't mind, but it's not my thing to forgive. The point is, there's something called, you can't steal credit. By the way, how often do you know, someone comes to you, they say, you know, this thing, I did that. I started this organization. I did that. Meanwhile, what'd they do? In the beginning, when the organization was starting, they mentioned something to someone. That was the extent of it. I started the organization. You stole the credit. Asur. So when we look at this correctly, we start realizing that stealing is something that is much more commonplace than maybe you might have imagined. And maybe we're not as strict. Can I ask you a question? Someone walks into the shul. They're charging their phone in the shul. Mutar asur. It should be asur. Now, it happens to be that most synagogues, like Mary in my story, if you ask them, what would they say? No problem. Yes. But did you ask? And if you didn't ask, why are you so sure that it's mutar? I see people, they're walking on the train. Sometimes in the train, the turnstile, the door is open. But I sat there, I watched. It was a busy train station here in Manhattan. And I see the door's open, so everyone's just walking through the open door. 4 people paid. 4 people. Okay? Sorry, I don't mean this to be funny. It just is a little funny, unfortunately. 4 people paid. 3 of them were religious Jews. And you know what the 4th person was? It wasn't religious Jewish. He was a blind guy. So he didn't know that the door was open. But these are people that are trained that just because the door's open, just because I could, doesn't mean I should. You could take a loan out from the government. You're supposed to, or you have to pay it back. You're going to take it and you're not going to pay it back. Mutar asur. You're stealing. And these ideas that, I pay taxes and this money is mine. And sorry, tell it to the Marines. It's true that maybe you should not be paying that much taxes. Maybe the government is spending your money. But the idea that you could take something, saying I'm going to pay it back, and not pay it back, it's a ganav. So the Torah here is telling us, listen guys, when you're a servant, when you're a slave for 200 years in Egypt, you know what happens? You're living in a survival mode. You do what you need to do to get by. But you're not a slave anymore. My rabbi said something very powerful. He said in Israel, there's a really interesting concept. In Israel, they tax small businesses to such a degree that it is impossible for small businesses to survive. Did you know that? The amount of money that the government charges small businesses is so high that small businesses can't survive. So they were speaking this over on an interview with one of the members of the government. So so the guy said, the truth is we know that these small businesses are underreporting, so we put a higher tax bracket, so then when they underreport, they're paying the tax that we wanted them to pay. So someone asked my rabbi, when he was saying this over, he asked, how could such a thing be? That the Jewish people are doing? He said, listen, for 2,000 years in Galut, you've had to figure out how to survive being a Jew. because we lived under Muslim rule, under Christian rule, under all these different places. For the first time in God knows how long, the Jews moved to a country where who was running the country? Jews. But it takes a while to work that out of your system, where you're not figuring out how to hustle and cheat and lie just to stay alive. It takes a little while to work that out of your system. That's what he said. But my friends, listen to this. Okay? When the government does that, when industries are set up that way, there comes a point where eventually we say to you, listen, you're no longer under this rule. You're no longer in extenuating circumstances. At this point now, you're already well-to-do. You're living in a country. You're safe. All those old practices, you're not in survival mode anymore. And therefore, at that point, we expect more of you. So the Jewish people are being told, right as they start the journey, the Law of Mishpatim, guys, the way you used to live is not the way you should live in the future. Be careful, be honest, be gracious if someone comes into your home or if someone is less than you, because you can still remember what it felt like to be in their shoes. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.